So welcome back to another episode, guys. Thanks for joining me. Excited to be here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for all the feedback, and thank you for the support. Without you guys, this would not be possible. Today, I'm diving into a topic that's near and dear to all our hearts because we're in this podcast game and we want to see growth. We want to see our show grow. We want to see our ecosystem grow. We want to see our financials grow. And so I'm talking about podcast growth today, and specifically 6 metrics that you can use to start measuring the success of your show. Now, I know what you're saying. You're like, well, downloads, that's really how I measure the success of my show. Yes, we all want to have more downloads. We want to blow up. But I challenge you to start looking at the growth of your show in various different ways. And I'm going to give you 6 ways that you can do that. That way you're looking at your show in a more multifaceted approach and a holistic way where you're looking at everything in your ecosystem. So let's give it a go. Okay, so the first is networking and relationship building. If you're hosting interview episodes, then you've already opened yourself up to a world of people that you may have otherwise not gotten to meet. And so I think through these professional relationships, through these interviews, you need to be measuring how you're growing your network. And so this can lead to opportunities, this can lead to sponsorships, and this can lead to friendships. And so these collaborations can boost your podcast profile. While it's a little bit hard to track, I think I would just measure like the meaningful connections that you've made. How many collaborations have you gotten from guesting or from being a guest? These opportunities can come when you meet these people. And how do you meet these people? By hosting a podcast interview show. That's number 1. Number 2 is episode completion rate. And so if you didn't know, you can go to Apple Podcasts Connect. That's Apple Podcasts Connect. I'll put the link in the show notes, but through there, you can log in and get a world of information about your podcast. A lot of people might not know this, but one of the things that you can see, and one of the things that I'm using to track podcast success, is episode completion rate. And so you can see, did my listeners only listen to 50% of my episode? Did they listen to 80%, 85%? If your downloads aren't growing like crazy, or maybe you're discouraged by your download growth, hey, maybe your episode completion rate is growing. And if you're getting, I'd say 80% upward, maybe even 75%, start there. People are listening to that much of your episode. That's good. And if you see that number growing little by little, that means that they're finding you interesting enough to listen to your either entire show or the majority of your show. Obviously, you want them to listen to the entire thing, but if they're listening to like the vast majority of your show, that means they like you. That means they're getting good, relevant information, and that means they're a fan. So start tracking that. Log into Apple Podcasts Connect and look at your episode completion rate. Number 3 is social media engagement. And while podcast audience aren't necessarily the same audience that you're going to have on social, I think if you're posting clips, if you're messaging people, if you're promoting your podcast on social media and you're noticing that your engagement is growing and that people are interacting with you more and they're interested and maybe they're asking questions or you're DMing them links to your show, that is all good. And I think you can start to notice some of that stuff and be like, hey, there's people that are actually like interested, and there's some conversations that are starting, and there's some relationships being built. I think you should start tracking that. That's a good way to know that like, hey, maybe my downloads aren't blowing up, but I'm starting to get some good feedback and people are liking it and I'm enjoying sharing with them. So definitely that's something to keep track of. Okay, number 4 is listener ratings and reviews. Maybe you noticed you've got a couple extra 5-star reviews this month, or maybe you noticed even just one person left a comment on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify and gave you a positive review. Hey, that's dope. A lot of people don't leave reviews. It's kind of a big step for them to listen to the podcast and then go into the app and give you a shout out and say, hey, this person provided me with education, or they made me laugh, or they inspired me, and I think it's a great show. Check it out. Boom, positive review, whatever it is. Like I said, if maybe 1 month you got 1 review, maybe a couple months later, you start to notice that you're getting like 3 or 4 reviews a month. That means your show is growing. That means people are excited, and that should give you some positive reinforcement. We will all want affirmation, and that doesn't necessarily come in the form of downloads, although we want it to, and it will. But you got to start looking at these things first. Number 5 is listener conversions. Do you sell a course? Do you sell digital products? Do you have a website that you are talking about in your podcast that you're sending people to? If you're in your show telling listeners to take some kind of action and you're able to track that, whether that's through clicks or through sales, and you're noticing that that's slowly on the up and up, and possibly it's because you've been talking about it on your podcast, that's growth, guys. That's awesome. That means maybe you're making a little bit of money, or maybe you're just seeing more clicks and eventually that's going to lead to conversions. It just indicates how effectively you're driving traffic through your podcast. And guess what? That's growth. And number 6, through your email list. Your email list is a direct line to your audience. And if you're telling people on your show, hey, go subscribe, I'm sending a weekly newsletter and it contains information about X, Y, or Z, and you notice that that's growing, and you can contribute some of that to your podcast, then that's growth as well. And I think ultimately growing an email list is going to be great because eventually you can start to pitch your products and services, or eventually you can do what you want with that. But if you're talking about it on your show and it's growing, chances are some of that traffic is coming from your podcast. And so email list growth is huge. And that's another thing to get excited about. Alrighty, guys. So that's a wrap. That was a mouthful. And these are 6 key metrics that you can use to start measuring your podcast growth. It kind of gives you like a 360-degree view of your show. And I think with podcasting, it's just important to start looking at your show in like a multidimensional way. Yes, we want more downloads, but there's other things that you can measure with your podcast. And if you started a podcast, it should be, in addition to downloads, to grow your brand, to grow your business, to make some money, to connect with more people, to build relationships. And these are all ways that you can start to measure those things. And the more you measure, the better. You don't have to get like super nitty gritty with like data and details. But I think when you start paying attention to this stuff, you'll realize that you need a baseline, because once you have a baseline, you can start to see if things are going up from there or down from there. And, you know, maybe once a month or once every couple months, be like, oh, wow, like this part of my ecosystem is growing. And I think it's because of the podcast, or it is because of the podcast, because you can track it directly. It's just going to, 1, give you a more holistic approach. And 2, I think it's just going to get you excited, because when your downloads aren't doing what you want them to do, it can be discouraging. But looking at these other things, you can be like, oh, okay, well, at least my email list is blowing up, or at least, hey, I got invited to go speak on a stage because I host a rad interview show and I've been meeting all these people and they want to return the favor. They like what I have to offer, and I got an invitation to speak, or I got an invitation to do X, Y, or Z. So keep listening, keep engaging, and keep creating. I'm out.